"Grandpa, if I give up now, who will believe in Mom?" A poor boy was saving every penny for a gift. But when his grandfather found out who it was for, his knees gave out. How far can a child go to save the person they love the most, when the whole world seems to have given up on them? When a simple dress holds all of a boy's hope, love can break even the hardest of hearts. The headlights of the cars dimly illuminated the wet asphalt as Rowan hurried between the vehicles, carrying a small bucket filled with murky water and a worn-out squeegee. His bare feet felt the biting cold of the puddles, but the boy seemed indifferent to the discomfort. He was used to it. His determined gaze scanned each driver, searching for an opportunity. Some drivers quickly rolled down their windows, offering coins that he accepted with a shy smile. Others simply pretended not to see him, staring fixedly at the red traffic light as if his presence were invisible or too insignificant to warrant attention. When the rain intensified, Rowan took refuge under a marquee, shivering as he pressed the earned coins against his chest, feeling his heart race with an urgency he couldn't explain even to himself. His thin body, wrapped in old, tattered clothes, no longer worried about the cold. His attention was captured by a small shop on the corner of the opposite street, a weak, warm light emanating from the display window, beckoning him with a silent promise of comfort. The boy stepped closer, fascinated by something that, for some inexplicable reason, stole his breath away. There it was, majestic yet delicate at the same time. A blue dress, simple, but in a shade so deep it seemed capable of stealing all the colors around it. Rowan pressed his face against the fogged-up window, feeling his breath create small clouds of vapor on the cold glass. In that moment, a long-forgotten smile appeared on his tired face. He imagined Lenora wearing it, smiling, perhaps with her eyes shining once again, just like in the old, crumpled photograph he kept under his pillow. Rowan was absolutely certain. That blue dress would change everything. It would bring his mother back. "Hey, kid, are you gonna buy it or not?" said a rough, suspicious voice behind him. Rowan turned quickly to find a burly man with a cigarette dangling from the corner of his lips, smoke lazily spiraling around his red, weathered face. I was just looking," Rowan replied timidly, taking a step back from the display. "Well, this isn't a place for beggars. Get out of here before I call the cops," the man grumbled, stepping threateningly toward the boy. Rowan backed away quickly, clutching the bucket against his chest as he ran toward his grandfather's house, his eyes fixed on the dark ground, unable to erase the image of that blue dress from his mind. By the time he arrived at the wooden shack late at night, the cold wind creaked the old worn boards, and the makeshift door seemed ready to fall off its hinges. Upon entering, Rowan tried to be quiet, but Orville's rough, deep cough immediately broke the silence, revealing that the old man was still awake, waiting for him. "Again, Rowan? Didn't I tell you not to stay out so late?" Orville growled, looking sternly at his grandson. The tired eyes carried a sadness and bitterness that the boy still couldn't fully comprehend. "I needed to work a little longer, Grandpa," Rowan said, avoiding eye contact, trying to hide the coins he had earned between his fingers. Orville sighed deeply, tired of having the same conversation over and over. The old man ran his wrinkled, calloused hands over his weathered face, marked by time and despair. "Do you really think those coins will change anything? Your mother chose that path, Rowan. She preferred that over taking care of you. How long are you going to insist on this?" Orville said, his voice choked with accumulated pain. Rowan clutched the coins even tighter against himself, as if trying to protect the small treasure he had earned with so much effort. He didn't want to believe his grandfather's words, but they hurt deeply because they contained a truth that the boy desperately tried to deny. "She's going to come back, Grandpa. I'm sure of it," Rowan replied, with a determination that seemed out of place for his 10 years. "She just needs to feel beautiful again. She'll love the dress I saw. If I can buy it for her, I know she'll want to be well. For us." Orville shook his head slowly, defeated by his grandson's naivety, but he didn't have the heart to completely destroy that fragile hope that still kept the boy alive and fighting day after day. "Go to bed, Rowan. It's late," Orville ordered firmly, turning his gaze away to hide the emotion his words had caused him. Rowan obediently walked silently to the small makeshift room, where a thin, worn mattress lay directly on the floor. The wind whistled through the cracks in the walls, bringing cold and dampness into the space, but he didn't care. He carefully hid the coins under a loose floorboard, his hands trembling with emotion and fatigue. Then he lay down, hugging his thin body to keep warm, his eyes fixed on the darkness of the room as he thought once again of that bright blue dress full of promises. Outside, Orville remained seated, staring into the void and feeling anguish tighten around his chest. He wanted to believe the boy's words, wanted to feel that there was hope, but life had taught him that hope could be cruel and treacherous. Lenora had deceived him many times with promises of improvement, promises that evaporated into the void of relapses, slowly destroying his tired heart. Now, that childlike hope from his grandson was even more painful, as it seemed doomed to the same failure. He struggled to his feet, feeling the weight of age pressing down on his tired bones, and walked to his grandson's room, stopping at the ajar door. There lay Rowan, curled up, whispering softly to himself, "The blue dress will save Mommy. I know it will." Orville felt a knot tighten even more in his throat and turned his face away, trying to hold back the tears that insisted on welling up. As much as he didn't want to admit it, a part of him longed to believe in the innocent and pure words of that boy who only wanted to see his mother happy again. "May God hear you, boy," Orville whispered almost inaudibly as he slowly walked away from the door, leaving his grandson with his dreams and childlike hopes. Inside, Rowan squeezed his eyes shut, resolute. His mind was already made up. He would do whatever it took to buy that blue dress. Lenora deserved a new chance, and he was willing to give everything he had for her. Not even his grandfather's bitter disbelief would be enough to stop his determination. But how could such a small boy gather enough money in time? And what if the dress was sold before he had enough? Could Rowan truly restore the dignity and hope of the mother who had lost everything to addiction? The night stretched on slowly, leaving behind questions that only time would be able to answer. The rain from that night gave way to a gray dawn, heavy clouds looming even darker over the city. Rowan opened his eyes slowly, feeling his body sore and his head heavy after a difficult night. A faint beam of light streamed through a crack in the wall, announcing that it was already past time to get up. The boy sat up with effort on the thin mattress, glancing around the makeshift small room, which reflected his poverty with relentless clarity. He took a deep breath, recalling the blue dress from the night before, the vivid image as if it were right there, in front of him. As Rowan slipped on his worn shoes, he heard his grandfather cough from the other room. He knew Orville would be sitting in the old wooden chair, sipping his usual weak coffee, trying to ease the pain that insisted on gnawing at his aging bones. The boy stood up and walked slowly to the makeshift kitchen, where he found his grandfather staring out of the broken window, lost in distant thoughts. "Good morning, Grandpa," Rowan murmured, watching Orville carefully as he grabbed a piece of hard bread from the table. "Good morning, kid. Did you sleep well?" Orville asked without taking his eyes off the worn floorboards. Rowan hesitated for a second before answering, avoiding mentioning the image of the blue dress that haunted his mind throughout the night. "I slept, Grandpa. You don't need to worry about me. I'll head out to work early today," the boy replied, averting his gaze as he pretended to adjust his tattered shirt. Orville looked at his grandson with concern, his deep-set eyes laden with sadness and frustration. He felt guilty about their situation. Guilty for allowing Lenora to drift so far away. Guilty for failing to protect his daughter in the past, and now feeling equally powerless regarding his grandson. There was something in Rowan's eyes that made him feel smaller and more incapable, as if the boy carried an invisible weight far greater than anyone his age should bear. "You don't have to carry the world on your shoulders, boy," Orville said, his voice rough and worn. "You're just a child. It shouldn't be you solving your mother's problems or mine." "But who will solve them then?" Rowan asked, almost whispering, not looking at his grandfather. Orville chose not to respond, preferring to turn his gaze back to the broken window, through which a cold wind blew. Rowan knew he needed to act quickly. The memory of the blue dress wouldn't leave his mind, and now there was a new weight on his shoulders. He needed to ensure his mother had a chance before it was too late. With a timid nod, Rowan grabbed the small bucket and the already worn rag hanging by the door and headed out toward the busy street that cut through the neighborhood. As soon as he reached the avenue, the sounds of the city filled his ears. Cars honking, loud voices mingling, and the unpleasant smell of smoke and dirt in the air. It was a hostile, cruel environment where the weakest were treated as invisible. Rowan positioned himself strategically at a busy traffic light, hoping that the drivers would be more generous that day. While he waited, a group of older boys from the nearby streets approached. One of them, named Luca, had unkempt hair and a gaze that seemed older than it should be, marked by the harshness of the streets. "You're out early today, Rowan?" Luca asked, his tone half-mocking. "I need to gather money fast, Luca. My mom needs me," Rowan replied, ignoring the provocation. Luca let out a cynical laugh, shaking his head. "Your mom again, Rowan? You still believe in that? She's not going to change, you know that." "She never does," Luca said coldly, but there was a shadow of something deeper in his eyes, perhaps envy or even sorrow. Rowan felt a pang of pain pierce his chest at those words. He didn't want to believe it. He couldn't accept that his mother was beyond help. He chose not to respond and focused on the approaching cars. As the red light lit up, he dashed forward, washing the windshields with a practiced efficiency born from necessity. Some drivers ignored him completely. Others barely offered a glance. Only one or two rolled down their windows and tossed coins his way. Rowan thanked them shyly, but soon his mind was overtaken again by the cruel doubt planted by Luca. Meanwhile, Orville, unable to bear the anguish he felt any longer, decided to walk slowly to the shelter where Lenora was staying. He needed to see her, to try to understand what had happened. What could still be done? Upon arriving, he found Clarine, the volunteer who always greeted him with a sad and understanding smile. She beckoned him to a secluded corner, her face marked by worry and fatigue. "Orville, I really wanted to talk to you," Clarine said gently. "We have a complicated situation with Lenora. The shelter can no longer cover the costs of her stay, and the management has warned that if the debt isn't paid, she'll have to leave." Orville felt as if the ground had vanished beneath his feet. A deep pain invaded his chest, and he had to lean against a wall to keep from falling. "How much time do we have left, Clarine?" he asked in a weak voice. "1 week, at most," she replied, visibly uncomfortable with the situation. "We're trying to raise funds, but it's very difficult. I'm so sorry." Orville nodded slowly, feeling guilty and frustrated with himself. He knew the guilt wasn't solely Lenora's. He also bore his share of responsibility for it all. He remembered Lenora's childhood, how she had been a sweet girl full of dreams, until the day bad influences entered her life, destroying her future little by little, while he lacked the strength or courage to stop it. "I failed her, Clarine," Orville whispered, with tears threatening to spill. "I failed to protect my daughter, and now I'm failing my grandson again." Clarine gently grasped the old man's arm, offering him silent comfort. There were no words that could ease that pain. Meanwhile, on the streets, Rowan worked tirelessly, ignoring hunger, cold, and exhaustion. Every coin he managed to collect was carefully stowed in the worn pocket of his tattered jacket. During a brief pause, he sat down near a group of homeless people gathered around a makeshift fire in an old drum. One of them, a man named Marvin, noticed Rowan's sad and exhausted expression. "What's going on, kid? You look sadder today," the old homeless man said, offering a dry piece of bread. "My mom might be kicked out of the shelter. I can't get enough money to help," Rowan replied, his voice thick and eyes misty. The old man smiled sadly, shaking his head slowly. "You know, sometimes things don't go the way we want, but never stop fighting. You're young, there's still hope. Don't give up," he said, gently squeezing the boy's shoulder. Those words, though simple, strengthened Rowan, who returned to the streets with renewed determination, washing windows and collecting coins with an energy rekindled, even though his exhausted body barely responded to his commands. As night fell, returning home to the shack he shared with Orville, he found his grandfather sitting in silence, staring blankly into the void. "What's wrong, Grandpa?" Rowan asked, concerned, noticing the heavier look in his eyes than usual. "Nothing, Rowan," Orville replied, trying to mask the desperation he felt. "Just tired, that's all." Rowan sensed that something was wrong, but he didn't have the courage to ask. He stored away the coins he'd collected, feeling they wouldn't be enough. He resolved that from that moment on, he would work even harder, without telling his grandfather, to gather the money that was still needed. Meanwhile, at the shelter, Lenora sat silently on the narrow bed, staring at the stained ceiling, unaware that her stay there was threatened. Her thoughts revolved around Rowan, and silent tears fell down her face. She wondered if she truly deserved all of her son's efforts, if she deserved this new chance, or if she was doomed to disappoint him yet again. In the quiet shack, Orville felt his heart constrict as he remembered the mistakes of the past, blaming himself for not being able to protect Lenora. In the adjacent room, Rowan silently counted the coins, trying to keep the flame of hope alive. Little did they know that the following morning, an unexpected event would radically change their destinies, putting to the test the love, hope, and courage of that small family. As we follow Rowan's emotional journey to save his mother, your support means everything. If you're moved by this touching story of hope and family love, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and activate the notification bell to never miss our updates. Leave a comment to share how this story touched your heart. Thank you. Orville gazed at the medals in his hands with a distant look, marked by the pain of old memories. The objects glimmered faintly under the cold light of the small pawn-shop office. The man behind the counter, with an indifferent expression, assessed the items with a worn-out magnifying glass, showing no respect or empathy for the stories those pieces carried. "Is this all you can offer me?" Orville asked, his voice weak, almost pleading. The man behind the counter, a guy with narrow eyes and an impassive demeanor, shrugged indifferently. "I'm sorry, sir. These metals are too common. They don't hold much value in the market these days." Orville pressed his lips together, swallowing the pride that still remained, feeling a tightening in his chest that spread throughout his body. Those metals were more than just old pieces of metal. They represented the sacrifice of a lifetime, the years of service dedicated to his country and family. A deep pain washed over him as he realized how little all of this meant in the eyes of the world. But Lenora needed that money, however small the amount, and Rowan was risking it all for a cause that seemed to drift further away each day. "All right, I accept the amount," Orville murmured, handing over the medals with trembling hands, feeling more humiliated than ever in his life. As he received the meager bills, he lowered his eyes to avoid showing the tears of shame that threatened to spill. Meanwhile, at another part of the city, Lenora struggled to focus on the simple tasks at the shelter. But the rumors about Rowan wouldn't leave her mind. She had overheard the staff whispering about a poor boy who was desperately cleaning cars at traffic lights, working late into the night, going hungry and cold just to help his mother. Even without clearly hearing the boy's name, Lenora knew in her heart it was her son. "Clarine, I need to talk to you," Lenora said hesitantly, seeing the shelter coordinator pass by in the hallway. "Of course, Lenora. What's wrong?" Clarine replied kindly. "I need to know the truth. Is it Rowan? Is he the one out there cleaning windows and begging for money on the streets?" she asked, her eyes filled with tears, unable to hide the guilt already consuming her soul. Clarine hesitated for a moment, but seeing the desperation etched on Lenora's face, she decided to be honest. "Yes, Lenora. It's him. He's working hard, saving money to help you. He believes that if he can give you something special, you'll find the strength to get through this place." Lenora felt suffocated. Those words weighed like tons upon her. She knew Rowan loved her, but that sacrifice felt too cruel. She felt small, guilty, and incapable. At the same time, a timid breath of hope began to stir in her heart. Perhaps she really could change. Maybe that child was right about her. Outside, Rowan darted between the cars, approaching drivers almost frantically. The day was particularly hot, and the boy had lost count of how many times he had been ignored, cursed at, or looked upon with disdain. With each coin earned, however, a shy smile of gratitude blossomed on his chapped lips. His mind remained fixed on the image of the blue dress, the radiant smile he imagined lighting up Lenora's tired face when she received it. That thought was what gave him the strength to persevere. By late afternoon, Rowan decided to visit the store again. His eyes widened in panic when he noticed that the dress had been removed from the display. He felt a rush of dread and rushed into the shop, nearly knocking over a stack of clothes near the entrance. "The blue dress, where is the blue dress that was in the window yesterday?" he asked anxiously to the distracted salesgirl, who looked at him without sympathy. "Oh, that dress? It's back there. A lady reserved it this morning but hasn't picked it up yet." "But I've been saving money to buy it," Rowan exclaimed, genuine desperation catching the attention of the manager, an elderly woman with a tired expression who was discreetly observing the conversation. "That's unfortunate, kid, but there's nothing I can do. Maybe another dress will do?" the salesgirl suggested, showing little interest. No, it has to be that one. My mom needs that dress, please, Rowan pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. The young woman sighed, turning to the manager, who approached slowly, looking at Rowan with a serious yet kind expression. "What's your name, boy?" she asked gently. "Rowan, ma'am," he replied, wiping his tears with his dirty hands. "Rowan, I'll try to hold the dress for you until tomorrow, but I can't promise more than that," she said with tenderness. "Come back first thing in the morning, all right?" The boy nodded vigorously, thanking her with emotion. He left the store with his heart racing and newfound hope. Tomorrow would be the day. He needed to gather every possible coin. As night fell, he returned to the shack exhausted, finding Orville seated in the same old chair, silently staring at the empty wall with a lost expression. "Hi, Grandpa," Rowan greeted softly, immediately noticing the sadness in the old man's eyes. "Hi, kid. How did it go today?" Orville asked, trying to hide the bitterness of the afternoon at the pawn shop. Rowan nodded, avoiding details. "I think I'm almost there, Grandpa. Just a little more." Orville looked deeply into his grandson's eyes, recognizing the determined glimmer that reminded him so much of Lenora before the addiction. He felt a shiver of fear and hope at the same time, unable to say anything that could shatter that delicate thread of hope in the boy's heart. Later, as Rowan slept restlessly, Orville silently faced the returned medals on the table. He felt defeated, but he knew he still needed to fight, not for himself, but for the boy sleeping in the other room, believing in something greater than he could ever understand. However, amidst the heavy silence of the night, an urgent knock at the door interrupted his dark thoughts. Orville slowly got up, intrigued, wondering who could be there so late. When he opened the door, Clarine's tense face appeared before him. "Orville, I'm sorry to disturb you so late, but we need to talk immediately about Lenora. Something serious has happened at the shelter." Clarine's urgent and worried voice made Orville's heart race with fear, leaving him anxious about what had happened to his daughter and how it could affect Rowan's dream. Orville opened the door with a racing heart. On the other side stood Clarine, wide-eyed and breathless, as the rain battered violently against her old, soaked coat. She seemed nervous, struggling to choose her words. "What happened, Clarine?" Orville asked, feeling a growing tightness in his chest. "Is it Lenora?" She hesitated for a moment, casting a wary glance inside the house to ensure Rowan wasn't nearby to overhear. "Yes, Orville. It's Lenora," she replied softly, lowering her eyes to the ground, as if searching for courage to continue. "She disappeared from the shelter this afternoon, left without telling anyone, and she still hasn't come back. I'm worried about her, Orville. You know how treacherous that path can be. A relapse now could be fatal." Orville felt his legs weaken and had to lean against the door to keep from collapsing. The thought of losing his daughter again, just as his grandson was sacrificing so much to help her, felt more cruel than he could bear. He took a deep breath, trying to control the tears that were welling up in his eyes. "She always does this," he said bitterly. "Always runs away when the pressure gets too much. Rowan doesn't deserve to go through this." "I know, Orville," she replied gently, discreetly wiping away her own tears. "But maybe she just needs to know that someone still believes in her." Orville remained silent, his mind drowning in a whirlwind of doubts and conflicting emotions. He had believed in Lenora before, countless times, and each instance had resulted in more pain and disappointment. Hope was dangerous. It could destroy more than it could save, he thought. Clarine sensed the old man's hesitation and gently touched his arm before turning to leave. "If she shows up, please let me know immediately," she asked in a weak voice. "She needs help." Orville nodded, watching Clarine slowly disappear into the darkness of the night. He closed the door, feeling utterly defeated. He turned slowly and found Rowan standing in the doorway of the bedroom, his face pale and eyes wide, clearly having overheard the entire conversation. "Is it true, Grandpa?" Rowan asked in a trembling voice, his face drawn with fear. "Mom ran away from the shelter." Orville took a deep breath, trying to control the anger and pain boiling inside him. "It seems so," he replied, without looking directly at his grandson. "And you still think a dress can save her?" Rowan fell silent for a few moments, staring intensely at his own feet, before lifting his gaze with determination. "I believe, Grandpa. She deserves another chance. If we give up on her now, we'll lose her for good." Orville felt a wave of guilt and irritation wash over him. He couldn't understand how his grandson could be so naive, so dreamlike. Deep down, however, he envied that purity, that unwavering belief that people could change. "Tomorrow will be a long day, kid. Better get some rest," he concluded, abruptly ending the conversation. The next morning, Rowan woke up early, even more determined to achieve his goal. He set out into the streets before dawn, willing to face anything to gather the remaining money he needed. The news about his mother was still on his mind, but instead of discouraging him, it only strengthened his resolve. Upon reaching the busy avenue, he noticed the usual hostility from drivers, but also something different. Some faces now seemed to recognize him, giving him looks of pity and solidarity. A driver pulled up beside him, slowly rolling down the window. "You're the kid who washes cars to help your mom, right?" the man asked, with a serious expression. "Yes, sir," Rowan replied, hope in his voice. The man rummaged through his pocket and placed some crumpled bills into the boy's trembling hands. "I hope you get what you want, kid. Good luck," he said, speeding off before Rowan could react with gratitude. The morning dragged on slowly, and the boy managed to collect more money than usual. Still, a significant amount was needed to reach the price of the dress. Knowing he couldn't stop now, he headed to the store to see if the dress was still available. As he entered the establishment, Rowan's heart raced as he noticed that the dress had disappeared from the display. The owner, a middle-aged man named Mr. Jenkins, saw him and approached immediately with an awkward smile. "I'm sorry, Rowan," he started, understanding the desperate expression on the boy's face. "The lady who reserved the dress just came by to pick it up. She's already taken it." Rowan felt as if a massive weight had been placed on his shoulders. All those hours of work, the coins he had saved so carefully, the hope he had cherished so dearly. Everything felt in vain now. "Is there no other like it?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Unfortunately, no. That was the last one," the shopkeeper explained, genuinely sad. "But look, maybe she'll agree to return it or something. I can try to talk to her." Rowan nodded slowly, unable to hide the tears streaming down his face. He left the store feeling empty, defeated, and humiliated by his own hope. The walk back felt eternal, each step heavier than the last. Upon arriving home, he found Orville sitting at the small kitchen table, a letter in his hands. Noticing the forlorn expression on his grandson's face, Orville momentarily forgot his own pain. "What happened?" he asked worriedly, rising slowly. "The dress was sold, Grandpa," Rowan sobbed, collapsing into a chair, utterly crushed. "I failed." Orville felt a sharp pang in his heart. Seeing his grandson's desolation, all the previous arguments, anger, and resentments seemed insignificant. He approached slowly, resting a trembling hand on the boy's shoulder. "You didn't fail, Rowan. You did everything you could. The one who failed here was me, for not believing enough," he admitted, his voice choked. "I'm sorry, kiddo." Rowan looked up at his grandfather, surprised by Orville's words. It was the first time he had ever heard the old man apologize. That small gesture warmed him inside, even in the face of disappointment. But before they could savor the brief moment of reconciliation, there were loud knocks on the door, this time accompanied by a firm, official voice. "Mr. Orville Harris, we have an urgent announcement for you. It's from the city's Department of Works." Orville walked to the door with slow, heavy steps. When he opened it, he faced two uniformed men, holding papers and wearing impatient expressions. "We regret to inform you, Mr. Harris, that your property will be demolished soon. The maximum time to vacate the premises is 5 business days. Otherwise, the compensation offered will be drastically reduced." The notice sounded like a definitive sentence. Rowan, still sitting at the table, felt the world crumble around him once again. Not only was he losing the dress, but now they would also lose the only place they had to call home. What they didn't know was that, later that very afternoon, an even more dramatic turn of events awaited them, an event that could change the course of their lives forever. Those words from the City Hall employees still echoed like thunder in Orville's ears, while Rowan remained motionless in the kitchen, watching him with a gaze filled with the pain of losing the dress. The silence between grandfather and grandson felt heavier than any sentence. Orville leaned against the table, his face twisted in an expression of pain and guilt, when Rowan finally stood up and gently touched his hand. "Grandpa, you don't need to be like this. We'll find a way out," Rowan murmured, trying to hide his own frustration. Orville forced a bitter smile, squeezing his grandson's hand lightly. There was something in that innocent gaze that broke down the walls he had built over the years. He knew the boy deserved more than this life filled with suffering, constant disappointments, and frustrations. He needed to protect him, no matter the cost. The next morning, Rowan set out even earlier to the streets. The determination on his face concealed the deep exhaustion and worry he felt. This time, his goal was to gather as many coins as possible, perhaps plead with the shop owner to order another similar dress, something that could bring back hope. The day was colder than usual, the wind cutting mercilessly through the bustling streets. Rowan shivered as he washed windshields, politely thanking everyone who gave him a coin. His small, fragile body trembled from the cold under the old, wet clothes, but he did not give up. As night fell, he had accumulated a considerable amount, enough to bring back a thread of hope. In a hurry, he hid the small box of coins under his coat and made his way back home through dimly lit alleys full of potholes that he knew like the back of his hand. However, as he crossed a narrow, dark alley, he heard quick footsteps behind him. Rowan quickened his pace, his heart racing with apprehension. Before he could react, he felt a rough tug on his back. The coat was ripped from his body, and the small box of coins fell to the ground, scattering its contents across the damp sidewalk. "No, please," Rowan pleaded, dropping to his knees to gather the coins. The thief, hooded and with no discernible face in the dim light, kicked Rowan, making him fall to the side. Before he could get up, the man quickly grabbed the remaining coins, shoving him back to the ground with brutality. "Get lost, brat," the thief growled, running into the darkness of the street. With tears in his eyes, Rowan cried out for help, his voice echoing between the old buildings. Orville, who had gone out searching for his grandson, worried about how long he was taking, heard the desperate call and ran towards the sound, ignoring the intense pain that burned in his leg with every step. As he turned the corner, he saw the silhouette of the thief disappearing into the darkness. He tried to chase after him, but soon felt a violent shock of pain in his leg and stumbled into a hole hidden by the worn asphalt. The old man fell heavily to the ground, groaning in pain as he watched, helpless, the thief vanish into the darkness with most of the money Rowan had gathered. "Grandpa!" Rowan rushed to him, desperate, tears mingling with the rain that had begun to fall. Orville tried to get up, but an intense pain shot through his leg, making him give up immediately. He felt useless, a total failure. With effort, and supported by his grandson, he managed to sit on the sidewalk, curled up, watching the few coins that remained scattered around them, shining sadly in the rain. "It's all lost, Grandpa," Rowan whispered, his voice heavy with pain and failure. "I couldn't protect the money." Orville held his face, looking directly into the boy's eyes, which were now red from crying. "You did everything you could, son. Don't blame yourself for this. I'm the one who couldn't protect you. I couldn't protect your mother. Or you." They sat in silence for a few minutes, as the rain fell harder around them. Then, with difficulty, Rowan helped his grandfather to stand, and they walked slowly home, supporting each other along the way. When they arrived, they found Clarine once again standing in front of the house, with an expression even more worried than before. She ran towards them as soon as she noticed the state they were in. "My God, what happened to you?" she exclaimed, helping them inside. "They stole the money Rowan was collecting," Orville explained with difficulty, "and I hurt my leg trying to help." Clarine carefully settled them in, offering dry towels and blankets to warm them up. Then she sat in front of them, her eyes downcast and her expression sad. "I have more bad news, Orville," she began slowly, avoiding looking directly at Rowan. "Lenora has really disappeared. We have witnesses who saw her leaving in the early morning with a group known for drug trafficking. She could be in danger." Rowan felt his heart shatter completely with those words. It was as if everything he had fought so hard to prevent was happening in an even worse way. Orville, unable to contain his own suffering, let the tears finally roll down his face, feeling a deep anguish take over him. "And now, what will we do?" Rowan asked, almost in a whisper, his voice trembling with pain. Orville remained silent for a few moments, while Clarine watched them with a mix of solidarity and helplessness. "We need to find her," Orville finally said, determined despite the despair he felt inside. "No matter how many times we've failed before, she needs us. We will find her." But even as the old man spoke those words, a cruel question hung in the air, almost like a threatening ghost. Was there still time to save Lenora? Or had fate already decided to take away any hope that remained? That cold morning, as the first light of day timidly broke through the heavy clouds, Rowan was already at the door of the house, his hands trembling from exhaustion, but more determined than ever. He clutched tightly to a small bag filled with coins, gathered by neighbors who, moved by compassion, decided to help in whatever way they could. The boy expressed his heartfelt gratitude, but deep down he knew those coins, though a kind gesture, were far from enough to solve their problems. Orville emerged from the house slowly, leaning on a makeshift cane he had found in the shed. His legs still ached, and his face was marked by sleepless nights. He looked at Rowan with concern, noticing the fragile state his grandson was in. "Rowan, you don't have to push yourself so hard," Orville said, his voice choked with anguish. "I promise we'll do this together. We just need to take it slow." Rowan smiled sweetly at his grandfather, despite his pale and tired face, his eyes shining with the strength of love he felt for his mother. "I can't rest now, Grandpa. Mom needs us. "She needs to know that we still believe in her," Rowan said, with a surprising firmness for someone so young. Orville sighed deeply, nodding slowly. He knew he couldn't stop the boy. He himself felt consumed by guilt for having doubted Lenora so many times, allowing his own pain and frustration to blind him to her struggles. Together, they began their walk through the decaying neighborhood, heading first to the shelter where Lenora had been staying, hoping to get news of her whereabouts. When they arrived, they found Clarine, who looked exhausted and worried. She quickly approached them, already anticipating what they had come to ask. "Orville, Rowan, I'm so sorry, but we still don't have any news about her," Clarine said, her voice heavy with sorrow. "I've asked all the staff to notify me if they hear anything, but for now, there's nothing." Rowan lowered his head, holding back his frustration. He wished that, in that moment, he could simply walk into the shelter and find his mother smiling, healed, and ready to come home. But he knew that reality was much harsher than his dreams. After thanking her, they left the shelter with their hearts heavy. They decided to walk through the nearby streets, asking residents and shopkeepers if they had seen Lenora. The answers were vague and discouraging, further increasing their tension and despair. For hours, they wandered through dark alleys, busy avenues, and corners where homeless people huddled around makeshift fires in oil drums. The scene of poverty, abandonment, and hopelessness was overwhelming. Rowan held his grandfather's hand tightly, trying not to show just how exhausted and frustrated he was. The fever was slowly taking hold of his body, sending chills through him and causing pain in his legs. By mid-afternoon, they arrived at a small public clinic, a rundown place with stained walls and dimly lit hallways. When they asked if anyone named Lenora had been admitted there, the nurse shook her head with a disinterested expression, quickly turning her attention to another patient who was screaming in pain in the waiting area. Each new place they visited was an additional blow to their already battered spirits. The feeling of helplessness grew, threatening to overpower even Rowan's persistent determination. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Rowan trembled visibly as Orville insisted they go home, worried about his grandson's condition. But the boy stubbornly refused. "I can't give up now, Grandpa. Mom needs us now more than ever," Rowan said, his voice beginning to lose its firmness due to the rising weakness. Orville realized he wouldn't be able to convince his grandson to stop. He decided to take him to one last place, an area known for the constant presence of drug users and dealers, where Lenora had last been seen. The old man's stomach twisted at the thought of bringing him into such a dangerous environment, but he saw no other option. The streets in that area were even more frightening, with narrow, filthy alleys populated by faces marked by suffering and addiction. Some stared at the pair with curiosity, others with distrust, while some barely acknowledged their presence, lost in their own despair. Rowan felt weaker by the moment, his head beginning to spin from the high fever that now burned intensely. Orville noticed the boy's deteriorating state, but before he could act, Rowan stumbled and collapsed to the ground, completely exhausted and without strength. "Rowan!" Orville shouted in alarm, kneeling beside his grandson and trying to wake him. "Wake up, son! You need to wake up!" People nearby looked on, some approaching timidly, others ignoring the scene, indifferent. A woman came forward offering water, while Orville desperately tried to bring his grandson back to consciousness. "Please help me! We need to get him to a hospital," Orville pleaded, his voice trembling with fear. Quickly, a young man stepped forward to help, carefully lifting Rowan and guiding them to an improvised clinic in an old abandoned building nearby, where volunteers were trying to attend to emergency cases. Upon arrival, Rowan was quickly placed on an improvised stretcher. His face was pale, his breathing labored and uneven. A young volunteer, her expression worried, began examining him immediately. "He needs urgent care. He's very weak," she explained, as she administered medication to control the fever. "What were you doing out on the streets so late?" Orville briefly explained the situation, feeling guilty for not having protected his grandson from such an extreme situation. The volunteer listened attentively and nodded, understanding the old man's pain. "I'll do my best, but I can't guarantee we'll have much time here. We need to get him to a hospital urgently," she stated seriously. Orville agreed, feeling crushed by the weight of the circumstances. As he watched Rowan, unconscious, a deep anguish filled his heart. He had promised to protect his grandson. But there he was, once again, faced with a situation in which he felt utterly powerless. While the volunteer worked diligently on Rowan's frail body, Orville sat heavily in a chair beside him, burying his face in his calloused hands, letting silent tears fall that reflected years of repressed pain. That moment was devastating, but there was still a much more anguished and unanswered question hovering over them. Where would Lenora be at that very moment? And would she know that her son was now fighting desperately for his own life because of her? As Rowan fights for his life and his family faces their hardest trials yet, your engagement helps us continue telling stories of love, resilience, and redemption. Please subscribe, activate notifications, and leave a like to show your support. Also, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how this story touches you. Thank you so much. Orville sat in the small, uncomfortable chair of the makeshift hospital waiting room, his face etched with deep lines of anguish. The flickering fluorescent light made the environment feel even more oppressive. Rowan lay restlessly on the improvised bed, breathing heavily, while a volunteer regularly monitored his vital signs. Orville rubbed his calloused hands over his weary face, feeling a profound pain that went far beyond the physical. A young doctor, her expression serious, approached him with a clipboard in hand. She cast a stern look in Orville's direction and began to speak in a low, soothing tone. "We need to transfer him to a hospital with better resources, Mr. Orville. Rowan needs care that we cannot provide here. Your grandson has a serious lung infection." Orville nodded silently, feeling the weight of despair constricting his chest. He knew the situation was dire, but hearing it from the doctor made everything feel more real and desperate. "How long can he last here?" Orville asked, his voice hoarse. The doctor averted her gaze for a moment, trying to maintain professionalism in the face of a difficult situation. "Not long, sir. The sooner we transfer him, the better his chances of recovery." A chill ran down Orville's spine. He needed to think quickly. Their financial situation was bleak. He had no way to afford a private hospital stay, and even at the public hospital, he would face a long bureaucratic wait that could put Rowan at greater risk. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of commotion coming from the clinic's entrance. A nurse rushed into the room, her expression alarmed, approaching the doctor. "Doctor, they brought in a woman who was found unconscious in a nearby alley. It looks like an overdose or something similar. We need you to assess her urgently." Orville felt a cold shiver run through his body. His heart raced as he heard those words. He struggled to rise and followed the two women, gripped by a devastating premonition. As they arrived in the triage room, Orville immediately recognized the fragile, weakened figure of the woman being settled onto a stretcher. It was Lenora. Her face was pale, her lips dry, and parted as if she were desperately gasping for air. Orville felt his legs weaken, and he had to lean against the wall to keep from collapsing. "Lenora," he whispered, a painful mix of anger and sadness in his voice. Lenora seemed completely unaware of what was happening around her, her eyes half open and staring at the ceiling, unfocused. The doctor rushed to attend to her, initiating emergency procedures, while Orville remained frozen, watching his daughter battle something invisible, something he couldn't fight against. After several tense minutes, Lenora was stabilized. Still unconscious, she was placed in a bed next to Rowan. Orville, with red and tear-filled eyes, slowly approached, feeling an unbearable pain at seeing his daughter and grandson side by side, both fighting for their lives. A gentle voice interrupted his dark thoughts. "Mr. Orville, we don't yet know exactly what happened to Lenora, but it doesn't appear to be an overdose," the doctor explained calmly. "There are signs that she was assaulted or suffered some kind of attack. We're investigating further." Orville took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and fear. He realized that in his bitterness, he had always assumed the worst about his daughter. Lenora was a victim of circumstances, just like he and Rowan. He felt guilt at how he had treated her, especially now when everything felt so fragile. At that moment, Lenora slowly opened her eyes, groaning softly. Her gaze wandered around the room until it found Orville. Upon recognizing him, a silent tear rolled down her cheek. "Dad!" she whispered, her voice so faint it was almost inaudible. Orville moved closer, swallowing the pride that had separated him from his daughter for so long. He sat beside her, holding her cold hand in his. "Lenora, I'm here." "You're safe now," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Rowan! Where's Rowan?" Lenora asked, alarmed and trembling. Orville sighed, briefly averting his gaze before looking at her again. "He's right here beside you, Lenora. He got sick looking for you." "He's very ill, but we're taking care of him," Orville explained, his voice heavy with sadness. Lenora closed her eyes, silently crying, her face filled with a deep pain that transcended physical suffering. "It's all my fault, Dad. I should have disappeared. I should have spared you both from this," Lenora whispered, sobbing. Orville squeezed her hands tightly, feeling his own anger and frustration slowly dissipating. "No, Lenora, you need to stop running. Rowan needs you. He never gave up on you, not for a moment. I've been too hard on you. I was wrong too," Orville confessed sincerely. Lenora sobbed harder, her body trembling with emotion. She felt crushed under the weight of regret, painfully aware of the suffering she had caused, yet deeply touched by her father's words, which had long been absent from their relationship. "He really hasn't given up, has he, Dad?" Lenora asked, almost in disbelief. Orville shook his head slowly, managing a slight smile despite the tears beginning to stream down his tired face. "No, daughter. Rowan believes you can become who you used to be. That boy has a faith in you that has taught me more about forgiveness and love than I've learned in my whole life." Lenora quietly sobbed, profoundly moved by her father's words. For years, all she had wanted was to hear something like that, a confirmation that she still meant something to someone. Now, hearing those words felt like a breath of life, a motivation to move forward, no matter how difficult it might be. In the next room, Rowan began to cough, calling for his mother in delirium. Lenora, desperate, tried to get up from the makeshift bed, but the doctor urged her to stay calm, asserting that she still needed care. Orville promised Lenora he would take care of their grandson and asked her to rest before stepping out to speak with the doctor, determined to resolve that situation once and for all, even if it meant making a huge sacrifice. As he heard the doctor's options and understood the costs and challenges they would face, he realized he needed to act quickly. There were no more easy choices or alternative paths. The situation was critical and did not allow for hesitation. In the face of the devastating reality, Orville made a difficult decision. He would sell his house in advance, accepting the compensation offered by the city for its demolition, even knowing he would not receive the full value. That house, though humble, was his last tie to the past, a symbol of stability that still remained in his life. But now, none of that mattered. Rowan and Lenora desperately needed him, and Orville would no longer hesitate to protect them, no matter the cost. As he walked through the clinic's corridors, his steps firm despite the pain in his leg, Orville felt his heart race. Would that choice really be enough to save the family? Could they overcome all those tragedies together? Or would new obstacles arise, testing their courage and hope even further? Orville walked slowly through the corridors of the makeshift clinic, his heart racing under the weight of the decision he had made. In his calloused hands was the newly signed contract from the city hall, sealing the early sale of the only home he had known for decades. It was the end of an era, but the sacrifice felt small compared to the anguish of watching Rowan and Lenora fight for their lives. A bitter sensation filled his chest as he remembered the home he was about to lose, yet he knew there was no other choice. He took a deep breath, trying to gather strength for what was still to come. Hours later, Orville returned to the place where he had lived his entire adult life. He stopped in front of the old wooden shack already surrounded by City Hall's isolation tape, waiting for demolition approval. With a deep sigh, he opened the creaking door, instantly inhaling the familiar scent of damp wood and cold coffee that permeated the space. He observed the dark, empty room, the peeling walls bearing witness to memories of difficult yet happy times. He felt his eyes sting, but he held back tears, determined not to give in to sadness just yet. Slowly, Orville opened drawers and pulled out a few belongings: yellowed photographs of a distant past, important documents, and a small chest containing old war medals. He wasn't sure what he would do with those mementos, but he couldn't abandon them to the cruel fate of demolition. Finally, he took a worn photo showing Rowan as a baby in Lenora's lap, both smiling before life became so complicated. The demolition went swiftly. Orville stood at a distance across the street, his eyes misty as he watched heavy machinery tear down in minutes what had taken decades to build. Each piece of wood, every old piece of furniture, every section of wall destroyed tightened his heart further. He couldn't shake the thought that beneath the rubble lay not just a house, but dreams and hopes that no longer had a place in that life. As the dust settled, Orville felt it was time to move on. He wiped away a tear that had escaped silently down his face, adjusted his old coat, and made his way to the store where the blue dress awaited, the symbol of hope for little Rowan. Walking through the bustling streets of the city center, he felt the weight of each step on his injured leg. The physical pain was intense, but nothing compared to the emotional burden he carried within. Finally, he arrived at the small shop, where the dress still shone behind the display window, intact and majestic. Upon entering, the bell chimed softly, announcing his presence. The shop owner, an elderly man named Marvin, looked up from the counter, immediately recognizing him. "Mr. Orville, back for the dress?" he asked with a gentle smile, which quickly turned into a concerned expression as he noticed Orville's frail condition. Orville nodded slowly, taking a deep breath to steady the tremor in his voice. "I came to get it. I managed to get the money. The house is no longer mine, but it doesn't matter. I just need that dress to save my family." The shopkeeper fell silent for a moment, moved by the strength and sadness in the words of this humble man. Without hesitation, Marvin carefully took the dress from the display, folded it delicately, and placed it in a decorated box. "Mr. Orville, I'm going to give you a discount. I've heard enough of this story to know that I'm not just selling a dress, but helping a boy save his mother," he explained, deeply moved, handing him the box. Orville tried to express his gratitude, but his voice caught in his throat. A simple nod and silent tears were all he could muster in thanks. As he left the store, he felt a small relief in his chest. He finally held in his hands what Rowan so desperately desired. As he walked back to the hospital, firmly holding the box with the blue dress, conflicting thoughts filled his mind. Would this really be enough? Could a simple dress reverse so many years of pain, loss, and sadness? He didn't know the answer, but he knew he had to try. For Rowan, for Lenora, for himself. Upon arriving at the makeshift clinic, Orville was greeted by Clarine, who looked clearly exhausted. She gently touched his arm, smiling sadly, yet warmly. "We managed to stabilize Lenora, Mr. Orville. She's a little better, although still emotionally fragile. Rowan, well, he's still fighting. We can't do much more for him here," Clarine explained in a low, concerned voice. Orville looked through the open door of the makeshift room and saw Rowan sleeping, breathing with difficulty. Beside him, Lenora sat in a chair, eyes closed, clearly shaken, with dried tears on her face. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the decisions still to come. Orville slowly entered the room, placing the box carefully on a small table next to Rowan's bed. He sat beside his grandson, gently stroking the damp hair of the child. Rowan slowly opened his eyes, and upon recognizing his grandfather, smiled weakly. "Did you get it, Grandpa? Did you buy the dress for Mommy?" Rowan asked in a soft voice, hoarse from fever and fatigue. Orville nodded affirmatively, trying to contain his emotion. "Yes, my boy. It's right here with us," he replied, his voice trembling. Lenora, hearing this from the other side of the room, slowly approached, her eyes filled with tears as she looked at the box on the table. When she realized it was true, she collapsed into silent tears, covering her face with trembling hands. "Rowan," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion and guilt. Rowan reached out his frail little hand toward his mother, beckoning her to come closer. Lenora sat on the edge of the bed, tenderly holding her son's small hands. "It's all okay now, Mommy," murmured Rowan in a low, almost inaudible voice due to the fever. "We're going to be okay. You'll see." Lenora nodded, trying to hold back the tears. Orville, sitting beside them, felt his heart lighter for the first time in years, even though he knew that many more challenges lay ahead. The dress was only the beginning of the journey, a small symbol of something much larger that they would need to face together. As night fell over the small makeshift hospital, Lenora remained seated beside her son, silently promising that she would never again backtrack in her fight. Orville observed everything, reflecting on the sacrifice he had made, on all he had lost, but also on what he was about to regain. After all, perhaps that little blue box held more than just a dress. Perhaps it could indeed bring back the hope that the family had lost so long ago. But just then, the door swung open abruptly. Clarine rushed in, her face bearing an expression of concern and urgency that immediately alarmed Orville and Lenora. "Orville, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a police officer outside wanting to speak with you. It seems important," Clarine said hesitantly, clearly worried. Orville felt his heart race again. Why was the police there? Was it about the robbery? Or worse, was there something even more serious he didn't know? With trembling hands, he slowly stood up and walked toward the hallway, feeling the weight of anxiety with each step. What else could happen now? Why, just when hope seemed to be rising, did new problems appear out of nowhere? Stopping in front of the door, he faced the uniformed officer waiting for him with a serious expression, holding a folded sheet of paper in his hands. "Mr. Orville, we need to talk. We found something important regarding your daughter, Lenora," the officer began, in a somber tone full of mystery. Orville felt a chill run down his spine. Something important about Lenora? What could it be now? Had Lenora gotten involved in something worse than they had imagined? With his heart nearly stopping, Orville stared at the officer, awaiting an answer that could once again change everything. Orville stared at the police officer with a mix of anxiety and fear. Each word spoken seemed to take an eternity to make sense in his tired mind. The officer took a deep breath, extended a folded paper to him, and spoke slowly. "Mr. Orville, we received an anonymous tip concerning your daughter, Lenora. Someone reported seeing her a few days ago, in the early morning, at a location known for drug dealing. We conducted a quick investigation and found that it wasn't true. In fact, Lenora was discovered unconscious in an alley, but there were no signs of recent drug use. On the contrary, she was trying to help another person who had overdosed." Orville felt his legs tremble with relief and sadness at the same time. He didn't know what to say. All this time, he had unjustly judged his own daughter. He shook his head, still in disbelief at the mistake he had made. I didn't know that. I thought she had given up again, that she had abandoned us once more," Orville replied, his voice choked with emotion. The officer placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and nodded in understanding. "She was indeed seen outside the shelter, but she was trying to help. However, it was misinterpreted. I thought it was important for you to know this. And honestly, I hope you can resolve things between you. She needs help, not hasty judgments." Orville merely nodded, unable to say anything more. He thanked the officer quickly, turned, and walked slowly down the hospital corridor, feeling the weight of each step. When he returned to the room, Lenora was next to Rowan, holding his hand gently, while softly stroking his feverish face. Orville entered quietly, approaching with the blue dress tucked away in a box, as if he were carrying something incredibly precious. Lenora looked up at him, surprised to see her father holding exactly what Rowan had so dearly wished to buy. She couldn't help the emotions flooding her heart. "Dad, how did you manage to get this?" Lenora asked, tears already brimming in her eyes. Orville slowly stepped closer, his face marked by pain and regret, and handed the box into her trembling hands. "I did what I needed to do. Our home no longer exists, Lenora, but at least I could ensure this for Rowan. He wanted so much to see you in this dress. He wanted you to remember that you are still valuable, that you deserve something beautiful in life. And I believe that now, too." Lenora couldn't speak. Her heart was shattered by the pain she had caused to both her son and her father, but she was also deeply touched by Rowan's gesture and Orville's unexpected sacrifice. She slowly opened the box, carefully taking out the blue dress. She felt the soft texture of the fabric, recalling when she still had dreams before addiction stole her dignity and hope. "It's beautiful," Lenora whispered with a broken voice, almost inaudible. "But I don't deserve this. I don't deserve either of you. You both try so hard. and I've only caused suffering." Orville held her hands firmly, his eyes brimming with tears and his voice steady. "Stop saying that, Lenora. Rowan fought for this because he believes in you. It's not time to give up. Wear the dress for him, for us, and above all, for yourself, because you do deserve it, my daughter." Lenora, tears rolling down her face, silently agreed. She stepped away for a few minutes into a small nearby bathroom, taking the box with the blue dress that symbolized all the hope her son still had for her. Lenora slowly dressed, feeling the soft fabric against her fragile skin. The mirror reflected a woman devastated by life, but who could still see, reflected in the blue of the dress, a nearly forgotten glimmer of hope. When she returned to the room, Rowan was still lying down, his eyes closed, breathing irregularly. Lenora felt her heart tighten at the sight of her son's fragile state. She approached slowly, fearing to wake him, and sat again on the edge of the bed, gently caressing his feverish face. "I'm here now, my son, and I will stay," Lenora whispered, with a strength and determination that even she didn't believe possible at that moment. Orville watched everything in silence, tears streaming uncontrollably down his face. For the first time in years, he felt true hope. He saw in the scene before him a possibility of a new beginning, something he had thought impossible for so long. The image of Lenora, dressed in that deep blue, beside her sleeping son, represented for him much more than a simple moment. It was the chance to rebuild the family he had almost lost forever. Hours passed in that quiet room, with Rowan sleeping deeply and Orville sitting in an old chair, watching Lenora carefully hold her son's hands. A nurse entered discreetly, checking the boy's temperature, and cast a gentle, supportive glance at the two adults, clearly seeing the significance of that moment for them. Midnight arrived silently, bringing with it a strange feeling of peace. Orville, emotionally and physically exhausted, closed his eyes for a few minutes while still sitting in that uncomfortable chair, but was soon awakened by the soft sound of Rowan stirring slightly in bed. The boy slowly opened his eyes, blinking several times to adjust his vision. Upon seeing his mother in that blue dress, a small smile lit up his pale face. "Mommy, you look so beautiful," Rowan whispered with a weak voice, yet filled with tenderness. Lenora squeezed his hands tighter, swallowing the sob that insisted on rising. "Thank you, my love. This is all thanks to you. I promise I will never abandon you again. I will never let you suffer because of me. I will fight every day, every second, to earn the love you and your grandfather have for me." Rowan smiled faintly, his breathing still labored, but his eyes were filled with genuine happiness at finally seeing his mother wearing the gift he had dreamed of giving. Orville, witnessing that touching scene, couldn't hold back his tears. For the first time in many years, he let his emotions flow freely, without shame, without fear. But while that precious moment unfolded in the room, life outside continued on its relentless course. Orville had no idea that another unexpected visitor was about to knock on the door of that small makeshift hospital. It was Marvin, the shop owner, arriving with news that could drastically alter the plans the family had begun to make for their future. The shopkeeper's expression was serious, and his quickened breath indicated that something important was about to be revealed. As he walked through the dimly lit hospital corridor, Marvin noticed the police officer who had spoken to Orville leaving the building. For a moment, their exchanged glances were laden with a disturbing silence, as if something important and unspoken lingered in the air. Marvin took a deep breath and moved on, determined to reveal what needed to be said, even knowing that it would change that family's life once again. When he finally knocked softly on the door of the room, he saw the three of them together, in an intimate and deeply moving moment. Orville stood up, surprised by the unexpected presence of the shopkeeper at that late hour. Seeing Marvin hesitant, with a worried and apprehensive expression, Orville felt a tightening in his chest. Something wasn't right. "Mr. Orville, I'm sorry to disturb you at this hour, but I need to tell you something I discovered about that dress I sold you. Something that may change everything again," Marvin said in a low and anxious voice. Orville felt a chill run down his spine as Lenora lifted her head, startled, staring intently at the shopkeeper standing in the doorway. The look in Marvin's eyes, filled with a mysterious sorrow, caused everyone in the room to exchange silent glances. What more could there be behind that blue dress that had already become a symbol of hope and despair for that family? The morning dawned clear, bringing a golden light that gently filtered through the hospital room window, slowly illuminating Rowan's face. For the first time in days, he woke up without a fever, his slightly swollen eyes opening to a new beginning. Lenora was already by his side, holding his hand delicately, smiling with eyes still red from sleepless nights. Orville, sitting in the nearby chair, had a distant look, lost in thoughts about everything they had faced to get to this point. The doctor entered the room shortly after, wearing a reassuring smile and bringing positive news for the first time in a long while. "Rowan is ready to be discharged," he announced in a calm and encouraging voice. "He's still weak, needs to rest a lot, and must take his medications properly. But the critical phase has passed. You've all managed to overcome the worst." Lenora felt warm tears streaming down her cheeks, a mix of gratitude and relief flooding her chest. Orville, usually reserved, gripped the edges of his chair tightly, struggling to contain the emotion that threatened to spill over. Rowan managed a faint smile, full of hope, looking directly at his mother with admiration and affection. After organizing their few belongings, Lenora gently pushed the wheelchair where Rowan sat, closely followed by Orville, who walked slowly beside them, limping due to lingering pain. Each step taken by the three of them down the hospital's long white corridor seemed to symbolize the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, a new chance they had fought so hard to achieve. As they exited the hospital, they were greeted by the intense sunlight, which stood in stark contrast to the gray days they had recently endured. Orville helped Lenora settle Rowan into the simple car that Clarine had lent them to take them to the shelter. Throughout the journey, they remained silent, each absorbing the emotional weight of that moment. A fresh start without the house they had called home for so many years. Upon arriving at the shelter, they were welcomed with warmth and solidarity. Several residents had prepared a small space for them to stay temporarily, improvising beds, clean clothes, and a cozy environment. Despite its humble nature, that space symbolized the generosity and support of those who had been touched by Rowan, Lenora, and Orville's difficult journey. Lenora, with her blue dress carefully folded in her hands, looked around the makeshift room and took a deep breath, absorbing this new reality. Even though she was drained from emotional and physical exhaustion, she felt stronger than ever. Looking at Rowan, she realized she now had an even greater purpose to stay sober, move forward, and rebuild her life. The boy looked at her tenderly, as if he understood exactly what was going through his mother's mind, and gently held her hand, conveying all the trust he felt in her. Orville, on the other hand, still felt a deep pain when he remembered the destroyed house. In his memories were all the difficult moments, but also the happy memories they had shared there. The loss of the house seemed to represent, in that moment, something deeper. The end of a painful phase, marked by resentment and emotional isolation. Now, it was time to move forward, no longer chained to the shadows of the past. In the days that followed, Lenora resumed her treatment at the shelter with determination, actively participating in activities, talking with other residents, and offering help whenever she could. Her face still bore the marks of the battles she had faced, but it also revealed a renewed strength, fueled by her son's unconditional love and her father's newly rekindled faith. Orville, witnessing Lenora's slow and steady transformation, felt increasingly closer to her, gradually rebuilding the trust and admiration that time had eroded. Each conversation, however brief, was imbued with profound meaning, as if they were slowly reconstructing what they had lost. Orville also found new friends among the shelter residents, sharing their stories and relieving the emotional burden he had carried alone for so long. Rowan, despite still being weak, showed clear signs of recovery. His smile began to appear more frequently, lighting up the surroundings and inspiring everyone who knew him. He didn't return immediately to the streets to work, but started helping around the shelter with small tasks that made him feel useful and valued. In each small gesture, it became evident how much he had matured quickly, without ever losing the sweetness and innocence that made him so beloved by all. The blue dress, so significant throughout this journey, now rested carefully folded on the makeshift bed where Lenora slept. Every time she saw it, she remembered that she was loved, that she had worth, and that her son had never given up on her. It became a concrete symbol of the hope that now drove her to persist on her path to recovery. Orville watched Rowan daily, impressed by his grandson's quiet strength. Gradually, he began to realize that this fragile yet determined boy was the real reason he too should continue to believe and fight. Days turned into weeks, and the small family, despite financial hardships, never gave up. After a while, unexpected news arrived. Some local residents, moved by the story covered by the press, had organized a small fundraiser to help Rowan, Lenora, and Orville start anew in a new home. The touching gesture from the community reignited the family's hope even further, proving that even amid difficulties, love and empathy could still break down seemingly insurmountable barriers. On a calm afternoon, Lenora put on the blue dress again, walking slowly through the shelter's hallways, accompanied by Rowan in his wheelchair and Orville by her side. As they crossed the small outdoor area, they felt the gentle warmth of the sun on their skin, experiencing a comfort that went beyond the physical. In that moment, they clearly understood that true happiness came from the certainty that they had each other, even in the face of uncertainties still ahead. Standing at the entrance of the shelter, the three contemplated the horizon, feeling the soft breeze touch their faces. Lenora looked at the sky, moved, and whispered softly, almost like a prayer. "Thank you, Rowan. Thank you for never giving up on me." Rowan squeezed his mother's hand, his eyes shining with emotion. Orville discreetly placed a hand on each of their shoulders, conveying all the affection that had been hidden behind his toughness for so many years. In that instant, everything they had lived through seemed to crystallize into a unique feeling of gratitude and hope. It was true that they no longer had a house, that their futures were uncertain, but they had something much stronger. They had regained love and trust in one another. Under the warm light of the late afternoon, they finally understood that the love they shared was enough to restart, face challenges, and move forward, regardless of what lay ahead. And so they remained there, watching the sunset, aware that, Despite the scars left by the past, they were now stronger than ever, ready to take the next step toward a future that could finally be built on the strongest foundation of all: love. This powerful journey reminds us that love, even amid poverty and despair, can ignite hope and inspire profound change. Rowan's unwavering faith, Lenora's resilience, and Orville's redemption teach us that no matter our past mistakes, it's never too late to rebuild our lives through forgiveness and compassion. True strength lies in family bonds, in believing in second chances, and understanding that everyone deserves redemption. If you enjoyed this touching story, please click the card on screen and watch our next emotional tale. Thank you so much for watching.